Hi, folks, and thanks for joining us here at SomeFuture for episode 28 of our podcast. We're your hosts, Jack and Chris.
What's up?
What's up, man? So for today's topics, we have on Present Futures, we'll be discussing the Kessler Syndrome and social media manipulation. On Paleo Futures, we'll be discussing the 1999 film Existenz. And on FizBiz, we'll be discussing space investing / tourism. As always, we hope that you enjoy our show, and please visit our website and blog where we post our supporting materials at www.somefuture.org. Follow us on our Twitter handle at SomeFuture, or visit us on our Facebook page, or simply connect with us on LinkedIn or Facebook. We always welcome your engagement with questions, concerns, or ideas of things you would like to hear about on our podcast by emailing us at somefuturepodcast@gmail.com or by engaging with us on social media. Now let's see what the future has in store for us in SomeFuture.
That's SomeFuture.
All right, Chris, for my SomeFuture, I wanted to talk about something, so a few episodes ago, we actually talked about the planet, about saving species near extinction, using technology to save it. Now I wanted to bring up the idea of saving ourselves from potential extinction. So something that unfortunately, that's an idea we talk about.
You.
I
want to stay alive.
Well, it's whether, we talk about it, whether it's concerning pollution, politics, or outside forces. That's something that we talk about quite often. And now there's this problem that I want to talk about. It's completely of our own doing. And it's mainly being able to continue to explore the known universe. But of course, our audience is like, but Jack, you always talk about how we are making such advances in technologies that will enable us to travel to all these distant planets and other solar systems. So why is this such a big deal? The big deal is this. So it's called the Kessler Syndrome. In this theory, it's been posited by space experts. It predicts that unless we do something to tackle the very real debris flying around in the planet's lower orbits, then we will potentially be unable to have spaceflight in the near future. So currently, space agencies around the world are tracking more than 750,000 pieces of space junk flying around in our planet's orbit. Some of this space junk is the size of a VW Beetle, and some of it is as small as a fleck of paint. However, those flecks of paint and other small debris may be the most dangerous, as they are flying around at incredible speeds and are very difficult to track. They are so dangerous, in fact, that a movie was created to explain the dangers of the Kessler Syndrome, a movie that you have probably seen, and it's called Gravity. So I'm sure you saw the Sandra Bullock movie with Gravity. So
Neil deGrasse Tyson hates that movie, right? Yeah.
But it does explore the real concept of the Kessler Syndrome. So using that example of the fleck of paint, one recently actually struck the International Space Station and caused a significant crack in one of their windows designed with some of the strongest glass that man has ever created. The reason being that this small piece of paint was so damaging is that most impact speeds for items in the planet's orbit travel at speeds of around 22,000 miles per hour. And that one small, 1 centimeter paint fleck traveling at that speed has the same impact as a 550-pound object traveling at 60 miles per hour. So imagine then if a bigger object had struck the station, say a 4-inch object with the same impact of energy as 7 kilograms of TNT, and that had struck the station. You have to remember that space agencies are currently tracking over these 750,000 pieces of junk, and 16,000 of those are 10 centimeters or larger. While most of those are between 1 to 10 centimeters, but those there's 16,000, and it's growing. So there's currently thought to be over 150 million pieces that are 1 centimeter or smaller. So imagine 150 million of those pieces of paint, those flecks of paint. So the oldest item that's actually still in orbit, I found this was interesting, is NASA's Vanguard 1 satellite, which was launched in 1958. It's no longer operational, but it's still pretty neat that there's something up there that old. So we've been doing this for quite a while. And so in this theory, it states that unless we do something to clean up the debris in the Kessler Syndrome, if we don't do it soon, it will continue to speed up. So breaking up into smaller and smaller pieces with further and further collisions and allowing for no space travel, no satellites. So think no GPS, no global communication networks, no live satellite television or sports, no weather satellites, no up-to-date stock or flight information, and much, much more. It was actually first coined by NASA scientists in 1978, and he stated that unless we clean up the debris, collisions will continue to happen, and those pieces, like I said, will get smaller and smaller, basically creating a cloud of highly difficult, non-trackable, and dangerous debris. What's more is that this is already happening, unfortunately. So in 2009, there was a defunct Russian satellite that crashed into a functioning United States satellite. Whether it was done intentionally or not, we'll never know. But that created over 2,000 pieces of debris. And then in China, actually, in the early 2000s, did the same thing. They conducted an experiment where they launched a rocket from the planet at a test satellite and created over 3,000 new pieces of space junk. I'm going to ask. Yeah. So, and I'm going to bring this up to you, Chris. So, I mean, what do you think there is that we can do? I mean, there's all these other things that I'll go into some of the actual technologies that are being developed right now. But I mean, does this not scare you?
I mean, it's not so much it scares me, right? I think sometimes society just scares me, and there goes my pessimism, right? The typically Jack character trait. And whenever I hear of this, I think of two things. One, I think of Wall-E. I don't know. Did you ever see Wall-E? It's one of my favorite Pixar movies. One of my favorite really movies in general. And so, spoiler alert, but of course in Wall-E, when they show the Earth, it's completely covered in space junk. I mean, it's just and if you actually look at the pictures of Earth with the space junk around it, it looks dirty. It looks like we don't care. And honestly, when you think about how we treat the environment, and there's oil spills and waterways, and we're dramatically damaging our country, and everything's on fire, and hurricanes everywhere. You just always think that human beings just don't think of the black swans, right? And futurists are supposed to think about that, which is why I wish the world was run by futurists, because they would think about this sort of stuff. But we just don't. And I think that's why we do this podcast. That's why we get these great guests that are champions of these very specific things. And space debris just happens to be one of them, right? You just say, oh, hey, kind of like nuclear waste. Well, what are we going to do with all this nuclear waste? Oh, we'll just put it in a mountain. Just stick it there. Or sometimes we'll put it underground, and we'll have an underground fire. Who cares? We're going to be gone. And I think we as a society need to figure out a way to better think, better think about the future, of course, right? Mm-hmm. Better think about how our actions are going to, lead to either positive or negative effects. And I think this space debris concept is exactly, something that I'm talking about. So please tell me that we have examples of things that we can do in order to fix this, because this is truly bizarre.
Yeah. So what's being done is, there's a good thing. You're right. There are futurists out there who are saying, hey, we need to do something about this. So there's an international effort being championed where space agencies are working together in what they call an International Space Debris Coalition. They're working together to find ways in which we can remove this debris and prevent further debris from entering Earth's orbit. So first, they established a standard that they're implementing in all of the host countries, that satellites are now supposed to have a maximum lifetime of 25 years. And then what they're supposed to do is descend into the planet's atmosphere and burn up on reentry, or move into a higher graveyard orbit. So they're sent so they won't hit each other and make the large debris fields. Or they're thinking about sending them into space to crash harmlessly into a planet or some sort of body into the sun. There's things like that. So that's the one thing that's also good news, is that every 11 years the solar cycle increases the amount of energy received by the Earth from the sun, which heats up the lower atmosphere, causing debris in the lower orbits to actually slow down and fall back to Earth to burn up. So the Earth kind of has a way of renewing itself in that regard, but it doesn't help our current situation, because we're actually filling space up faster than this cycle can take place, with hundreds of new launches every year and more companies and countries joining the space race. So what are scientists doing to combat this issue right now with the stuff that's still up there? NASA has suggested something they call SPADE, which is Space Debris Elimination Program, which shoots pulses of atmospheric gases into the atmosphere at targets that would destabilize their orbits and cause them to fall back into the atmosphere. The gases themselves would actually also fall back into the atmosphere and cause no additional junk themselves, and it wouldn't harm anything like the ozone or anything like that. The European Space Agency has created a device, and a British company actually it came out in September that it was done successfully, where the European Space Agency created a device that uses a harpoon to capture large objects and either slingshot them into a lower atmosphere to be burned up, or bring those items back down to Earth. Like I said, in September, they did this successfully. They released an object, actually. They didn't capture something that was already in the atmosphere, but they released an object, and then they brought it back in using the harpoon, and they took a video of it to show that it does work. It has a net attached to it, so it just kind of wraps up the object and brings it in. That's good news, because that means that people are thinking about it and working on realistic solutions. So, Chris, you tell me, I know you've covered this. I know we've talked about this before. Do you think, I'll ask you a couple of questions. So first, what do you think is the best solution out of what I mentioned and maybe what you've heard of? Second, do you ever think we'll reach a period where the Kessler syndrome becomes reality? And three, are the Russians ever going to control their satellites?
You know what I'm hoping is that maybe we can have some sort of cool ray system where we can just shine a laser, right, and we'll see like some cool like explosions every New Year's or something like that. Of course, I could always imagine the worst possibilities, but I'm a optimist, right? So even though there's some pessimism in me when it comes to what humanity does, there is always a teenager out there who is going to come up with the ideas and maybe even make money off of it in order to get rid of this space debris problem. So, I think there is always a way out. I think when we talk about space, though, we need to remember that we need to think of this as an international sort of system. So we can't think of it as a United States problem or European problem or an African problem or a Russian problem. It's a world problem, just like climate change, just like biotechnology, just like nuclear proliferation. It's a global issue. And we really need to take a hard look at how we sort of, take it on. And additionally, we want to go ahead and propagate space. We want to create more endeavors into the lower Earth orbit. And we want to go to the moon. We want to go to Mars. I don't want to have, Kessler syndrome impede that. I also don't want to impede the need for extra satellites to be able to track us, on the ground and whatnot. So again, I think maybe even just satellite sort of launching satellite operations should probably be looked at globally instead of country by country, because it's the whole Earth that it's surrounding. Of course, we all own pieces of the Earth. There's if the fact that Russia has something flying above us, and Africa has something flying above us, and China has something flying above us. Meanwhile, at any point, that thing above us could land in the United States. It could land in Fiji. It could land in the Azores. It could land in Zimbabwe. And so that means that it's a global problem. It's not a country problem. So I think that's just what we got to do. Every now and again, we just got to scratch our heads, come together and say, this is something that we need to sort of take a look at globally. And we need to come up with regulations and rules to ensure that we can use it, properly.
Well, and you hit the nail on the head. So if you look at what's going on with SpaceX right now, they actually just launched like dozens of satellites into the lower atmosphere. And what's great is those are designed to eventually burn up and return back to the atmosphere. So people are doing the right things right now. Personally, I think, and one thing I didn't mention, but I think would be a great solution is, and they have mentioned it in other scientific journals, is having a laser. So having something that's maybe solar powered up there that charges up and then it shoots lasers using probably artificial intelligence, some sort of precision system to basically vaporize these particles so that they're no longer a threat. And I think that's probably a good thing for the smaller pieces. There's going to be groups of those. I think you can just send like some sort of decently sized laser, and it does that. I think that would be a great solution. And then harpooning and sending these things, like slinging them onto the moon, so then they can use those resources to build the moon bases. That's something that I thought of. But yeah, I'm glad that people are thinking about it. And I'm going to be honest with you. I agree with you that I'm an optimist in this regard. I think it's going to be fixed as well.
Okay, so for my SomeFuture present futures, I decided to bring up a topic that really we've been sort of talking about a lot. We've been talking about fake news. We've been talking about democracy, right? The future of democracy. And I think we talked about it from like a technology perspective for sure, AI manipulating fake news and fake videos, and definitely this sort of, democracy thing. But I don't think we ever pinpointed, any work that's been seen in this completely. So, there's some work recently that has come out, a paper called Challenging Truth and Trust, a global inventory of organized social media manipulation. This is coming from the University of Oxford, Oxford Internet Institute, and it uncovered some four key findings here, right? So it says we found evidence of formally organized social media manipulation in 48 countries, up from 28 countries last year. So that's between 2016 to 2017, in which each country there's at least one political party or government agency using social media to manipulate public opinion domestically. Two, much of this growth comes from countries where political parties are spreading disinformation and countries where government agencies feel threatened by junk news and foreign interference. Three, in a fifth of these 48 countries, mostly across the global south, we found evidence of disinformation campaigns operating over chat applications such as WhatsApp, Telegram, and WeChat. And then the fourth one, for computational propaganda, still involves social media account automation and online commentary, but it's making use in paid advertisements and search engine optimization. So this is actually pretty disturbing report, really, when you think about it, right? So we're talking 48 countries in total where this is happening. I would probably assume United States is probably one of them, and maybe some countries in Europe. Obviously, you would think countries like Turkey or the Philippines, Russia, more autocratic states for sure. But the fact that it went up from 20 to 28, so over 100% increase is pretty substantial. I think the other thing here is that the fact that there's growing disinformation happening, there's a lot of sort of junk stuff happening out there. It's finding its way sort of beyond the social channels. So WhatsApp, Telegram, and WeChat, of course, these are sort of global communication tools. Think of it akin to Verizon and or AT&T here. So I know we both used to work for an Indian corporation, and one of the easiest ways to communicate with your folks is actually WhatsApp, and of course a lot of other folks use Telegram or WeChat to connect with. So the fact that you're finding sort of social media disinformation campaigns not just on the Facebooks, of the world, or even the Twitters of the world, is actually disturbing. And then not only that, but there's sort of the automation of these. There's of course the bot farms and troll farms that happened in the United States during the 2016 election, or allegedly happened, whatever you want to call that. Mm-hmm. So I think this is just everything that we've been talking about, right? The fear of government using information as a tool in order to push their agenda, or even corporations to push their agenda, or leaders, or even cult leaders, to push their agenda. And now that it seems to be spreading globally, and you kind of felt like it was, right? But there really, I didn't see any numbers behind it. So this is pretty disturbing. I think first I just wanted to sort of get your thoughts on this, and then I wanted to talk about other sort of information systems in government that might be helpful to talk about. But I mean, what are your thoughts just right now on this sort of global disinformation and social media campaigns that are really manipulating government, around the world?
Well, I think for Americans, it became very prevalent after the 2016 election. I don't know, we try not to go one way or the other in our podcast when it comes to either conservative or liberal, but it seemed very apparent during the election that things were being influenced by outside actors and social media, and it became even more apparent now as the years have gone by that Russia did play a role in trying to change some political perspectives. I mean, and people are taking note of this. I mean, it's now when something's popular when it's on television. So in stories that people create in sitcoms and things like that. There's a recent episode of Madame's Secretary where they took note of a campaign by an outside group who it was basically a Russian bot farm where they stirred up an entire country to violence by posting fake news and social media to websites, which were picked up and spread around the country, which incited the violence. And obviously, where that was a fictional story, that still means that it's in the mindset of Americans, and they can relate to that and understand what that story is trying to tell them. I mean, I think overall, fake news is a danger to our democracy, man. Take the most recent election. Even if the popular vote was for someone else, but electoral vote was for Donald Trump. Even by some people, both sides are propagating the idea that there was collusion. Even now in 2018 with the recent elections we had, they said there was collusion, fake ballots. All of these people who were trying to stop people from voting and things like that. And that really is harmful because it takes away from the legitimacy of our democracy and makes people want to, consider impeachment and things like that of a duly elected president or of elected officials. I mean, it underlines the principles our society is based on. I'm just concerned about that.
Yeah, I think the concern is valid. I think it's good also to differentiate between the mechanisms of voting and sort of this information issue here. I was doing additional research to sort of talk about this, and I came up upon this Lawfare blog. And by the way, Lawfare blog is doing a really good job of kind of taking a look at how the legal system is implicating really just everything in the United States and in general. But found this blog particularly important. And actually, the first sentence is perfect. Democracy is an information system. That's sort of the starting place for their paper. In which these two gentlemen, Henry Farrell, who's a popular science international affairs professor at George Washington University, and Bruce Shire, who's a security technologist, they took a look at sort of democracy through the lens of information security and how sort of vital information security is, because, we have this thing that's sort of tribal and political knowledge that we use in order to make decisions. Really, that's what campaigns are about. That's what, news and media is about. And of course, now that Facebook and Twitter and all these other social channels are an information feeding system, that means that we really have to pay attention to how they're being used, how they're being regulated. I find that the fact that both Google and Facebook pretty much have no regulation on them is particularly disturbing. In fact, I was just listening to a podcast today, how there really has been no regulatory actions by really anyone, whether it's Barack Obama, George Bush, or Donald Trump in the past 16 to 17 years. I think the last really major regulatory action came in 2001 or 2000 or 2002, something around that. I'll have to look that up. But, I think this is something we definitely need to sort of take a look at and sort of how it works. Now, the other thing to discuss, I think, also is just how important, I guess, information, but also technology development is when it comes to spreading information, right? So, I came across this from Nature. It's researchers signed petition backing plans to end paywalls. Mm-hmm. So more than 1,400 researchers have signed an online letter backing the principles of Plan S, which is a bold open access initiative led by research agencies to, pretty much establish open information portals for their papers. And us being a podcast, a lot of what we research is from, backed or paywall services that you only have access to if like you're affiliated with the University of Georgia, of course. So, you sort of get access. If I am going through a PhD program in the future, or even when I was getting my master's degrees at the University of Houston, I had sort of access. But if you're not a college student or a professor or somebody in that system, unfortunately, you don't have access. And matter of fact, Aaron Swartz, who was a very big open source champion, unfortunately committed suicide. This is one of his pet projects. I know there's things, I forgot what the exact website is, but there's a young woman who is, sort of championing the open sort of access movement. And I think that's particularly important, right? Because when you sort of put ideas behind lockboxes, only certain people have the ability to use those ideas to formulate new innovations anywhere. Of course, this could be innovations in science, biology, material science, what we're talking about, democracy, philosophy, and whatnot. So I think hiding this sort of stuff behind chains is something that government should take a look at. And I also think in this other paper, U.S. government seeks information on how to control emerging technology. This is also particularly important, right? This just came out in November. The Department of Commerce pretty much put up an open list item of, sort of how to define, identify emerging technologies and how to sort of rationalize them and talk about them. And these technologies include things that, of course, we love, right? So biotech, AI, position, navigation and timing, brain computer interface, robotics, hypersonics, advanced materials, advanced surveillance technologies. Go ahead,
Chris. Are those dangerous? I mean, that's a question I have to ask you. Is like, I read the article too, and I mean, that's a question I wanted to ask you. Is
Sure.
What technologies are dangerous, and what makes them dangerous in your opinion?
Well, I mean, social media seemed fairly innocuous, right? When it first came out, it was cat videos and talking, amongst your family and friends. So, I don't think any technology is inherently dangerous. It's how we use it and how we use the technology. Yeah. So I think all of this that we're talking about, right? The U.S. government seeking information or help on how to figure out these emerging technologies. I think keeping open the research, capabilities of university professors is particularly important. And of course, the growing issue with information and disinformation campaigns and social media. And of course, how it affects governments. I think what this really tells me is that government, NGOs, groups of people in general around the planet need to figure out what to do with this technology. I think we do talk about this a lot when we talk about technology, because we talk about both negative and positive attributes. I mean, we could go through that list, and biotech. I think we've spoken on the both dangerous as well as the revolutionary aspects of what it could be, right? So we can go through that whole 14 technology list and probably get the positive and negatives out of each and every single one of them. But I think the reason why I wanted to bring this up, because I see the need for us as a society, and this doesn't just have to be the government. It could just be groups of individuals who work in these spaces, whether it's social media, whether it's advanced computing technology, research and education. We need to take a hard look at the ethics of technology development, the ethics of technology innovation. I think, the problems that you hear at places like Google and Twitter and Facebook, it's because they may not have passed their ethics exams, or at least forgot their ethics exams when they dropped out of Harvard, right? Because they dropped out, right? They're all college dropouts from these big schools, and apparently they didn't make it to that ethics class. So just think it's a particularly important thing to look at, as we just can't just throw the lever down and continue to go without kind of paying attention to the ecosystems that connect everything together and how it may be detrimental or not to society. Great. So for Paleo Futures this week, I went into the wonderful world of 1999 and the director. Yeah, I mean, do you remember 1999?
Man. I partied like it was 1999.
That is so lame that you said that. No, I'm just kidding. I was a class of 99, which is not interesting for anybody. But what also happened in 1999 is that David Cronenberg, noted great director of, many things like Videodrome and Scanners and, Cosmopolis in 2012 and, tons of other stuff. But amazing director, strange director. And so he wrote this movie and directed it, which came out at the same time as The Matrix. So you had two, sci-fi movies coming out at the same time. And of course, The Matrix got all sorts of stuff. And you know what? I think one day maybe we should tackle The Matrix on Paleo Futures just to kind of discuss. I think it really had an impact. But in the meantime, let's talk about Existenz, right? So Existenz is 1999 sci-fi body horror film produced. We'll talk about body horror in just a moment. It stars Jennifer Jason Leigh and Jude Law, who was in everything around this time. And the plot sort of goes like this. So, in the near future, a biotech virtual reality game console and its designer. So one of the designers named Allegra Geller, who's Jennifer Jason Lee. She's this world-renowned game designer, and she is essentially sort of demonstrating her virtual reality game Existenz to a focus group, right? So essentially, Jude Law is there to sort of help sort of lead this group. And what's interesting about this particular game is that these pods, the game pods, are actually body pods, right? They're MB cords that attach to bioports. They're sort of, these connectors are surgically inserted into the player's spines, which is, sort of crazy when you think about it. And so they sort of start this game off, and Geller discovers that, this pod, going back to exactly what's happening, right? So this realist guy named Neil Deitcher, he shoots Allegra in the shoulder because he wants everybody to be real. He doesn't want anybody to be in this VR world. So he shoots her in the shoulder. The security team comes out, and Ted, who is Jude Law's character, rushes her out, escorts her outside. And then they end up going to some, remote hotel to sort of figure everything out, to figure out how to do this. It turns out that the game pod, this one that's connected to organically to spines, is damaged. And so there's only one way to find out, of course, if it's damaged, and that's to go inside the game. And of course, that's when sort of everything kind of takes off and turns into, the sort of virtuality kind of thing that we discussed in other shows, kind of like Strange Days. I think obviously the Matrix comes into play. Now, what's interesting about this, obviously, there is the biology sort of thing. I think this is the first time beyond just the fact that we're batteries in the Matrix, right? So the first time that the plot device of this is having to do with us being biologically sort of connected to things. But to me, the more interesting thing about Existenz is really what a lot of sort of video game exploration talks about, right? So it's the, when they're in these worlds, and we don't want to do any spoilers, but just a lot of stuff happens, right? And reality sort of, they don't know if they're in the game, they don't know if they're in reality. All sorts of weird things happen. There's a lot of gooey, weird special effects. When you watch the movie, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. You'll be like, wow, that's completely strange. But, in some ways, I think we forget how strange it is to put on a headset and talk to somebody in a different place and kill people, in Call of Duty, or turn into an elf, or turn into, a wizard when you're playing World of Warcraft, or, Skyrim, or any other of these multiplayer RPGs where you get to be somebody else. And so that's what really, I think, is sort of interesting about Existenz, is the fact that it's this weird place that is automatically weird because you're sort of connected biologically, right? But that you don't know what's real and what isn't. And so in turn, it leaves you kind of twitchy and confused and, unsure of sort of how to, sort of take these things. And I think what it showed really is the anxiety that we have about entering these worlds, what it's like to sort of, go beyond these worlds, what it's like to sort of pull yourself away from the real world, which is why, of course, the realist guy, came in to shoot away Jennifer Jason Leigh's character. And I think it's just sort of an interesting kind of way to take a look at this world that we've created. Yes, is it silly, or does it feel weird when you see a biological game pod and, connect to an orifice, and it's very weird looking and stuff like that you see in the film? Obviously, yes, that's completely weird. But, this whole idea of creating worlds, like there's this character played by William Dafoe, and he's like, did you ever play her game Art God? And he's talking about Allegra, the one who built it, thou, the player of the game Art God, very spiritual. So he's talking about the sort of spiritual aspect to it. And meanwhile, this guy is a mechanic, right? And he's like somewhat knows this technology because they run into an issue. But it's just the idea about entering imaginary worlds and how it warps into our own is always particularly, helpful. And I think it's, this goes to show that these sorts of ideas have always been there. And I think they always probably will be there as we begin to enter and explore different worlds. And I don't know. I mean, I think also this game is what might be strange to some of our
Hmm.
viewers. It doesn't have the same sort of kind of sexy action sequences that Strange Days had, which I think is sort of akin to this kind of virtual world stuff that we're talking about. But I will say it was a fun, quirky ride for anything, and I thought it was definitely cool and definitely sort of future bound for sure. So I don't know, what did you think?
So I hadn't actually seen this a couple of years ago, and when you brought this up that you were going to be doing this for Paleo Futures, I rewatched it, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I missed so much," because I was so much younger when it first came out. Yeah. So I mean, I think Existenz, it's not going to be like your great movie. It's not going to be like, you're right. It's not like this awesome action movie, things like that. But it does pose some really interesting questions, and you did bring up a lot of them. I mean, you said, does it? I mean, it makes us question what is reality, which it's interesting that I mean, you're right. The Matrix came out at the same time. It seems like that was the late '90s. Everybody was thinking, "What is reality?" So that was an interesting concept. And I think as a gamer, I enjoyed the movie specifically because it questioned, what is the future of gaming? Obviously, in 1999, you had things that were coming out, new technologies, the new millennium. What is the new world going to be like in the next, 1,000 years? And I think that's what a lot of people were questioning in movies and film at that time. And I don't know. I think the film is great to me because it questions things like body modification, connecting to a game, getting lost in that side of reality. It puts out subtle hints about what is reality. What effects does gaming have on psychiatry? In the end, I think the movie and it's supposed to make you feel uncomfortable. I
Ooh.
think that's a really good way to look at it. It has biological components and all these things that kind of gross you out in some ways, and it makes you question all of those things that you and I just talked about. And I don't know. I really found it interesting in that regard. I think it could have been done. I mean, from what I understand, the budget wasn't really that high, and so that's probably why a lot of this, there weren't those crazy action scenes and things like that. I think that is probably part of the reason why but also what makes it great is that when films don't have to rely on giant budgets like Transformers, it's able to focus on the real thoughts behind what they're trying to create in a film, and I think that's where you get some of the best.
Yeah, and I agree. I think for sure there's a lot of darkness and weirdness in this. And I don't think we should forget that when we enter these worlds. And by the way, I was just having this conversation this weekend with someone about the world of VR. He has a VR setup. He's got the HTC Vive, and we were talking about being a person in this world, and then also being a person in the other world, and then having multiple sort of worlds to sort of feed in. And of course, Existence sort of talks about that a little bit, but it also talks about how weird that is and how
Yeah.
disturbing that is. But also, it's interesting, right? The opening sequence, they're all gathered to do this, sort of product test, if you will. But it's essentially in a church, right? There's church
Yeah.
pews and whatnot. So, David Cronenberg is definitely putting in all sorts of stuff in here, about our escapist capabilities, us trying to transcend experience, what is reality, and how, kind of confronted and afflicted we may be because that, the cosmos is complex, it's irrational, and it's sort of hard to deal with. And how do you know who you are and what you aren't? So, do yourself a favor, take a look at Existence, tell us what you think.
I think it's on HBO.
It's on HBO for sure. So pick it up. And, despite the weird biological stuff, which, by the way, that's something we didn't even think about, right? The future of video games could also be biological. And who's to say, right, that, we may have things where we can actually turn into another person, or we can connect to another person through their psyche. I remember being John Malkovich, where you could enter another person's human being and sort of deal on that, and how weird that is and strange that is. So I think it's okay to embrace the strange world of video games and being somebody that you aren't. And it's great to actually think about what it could be and how this stuff sort of makes us. And I think if we sort of ignore the strangeness of being in another world, we sort of miss out on our own humanity.
Want some money?
All right, space. It is the final frontier for investing. All right, folks. So it's time for FizBiz.
FizBiz.
Yeah, roar, yeah, FizBiz. All right. So we don't take any responsibility for losses that you incur by listening to what we say because our lawyers told us we shouldn't, and you're responsible for making your own investment decisions because you're hopefully a competent adult. Competent adults say what?
What?
All right. So here's the deal, guys. We have a lot of listeners who happen to be in business, who like to maybe invest in science fiction type things, from the occasional weird gizmo to the thing that seems so crazy it just might work. So we figured on this FizBiz, we're going to talk about, what's more science fiction-y than space. For this segment, I'm going to talk about a list of potential investments in space. When I'm talking about investing in space, I'm talking about 4 major areas of current investing and about 2 to 3 areas of emerging investment opportunities. So obviously, I'm going to talk about space tourism, asteroid mining, satellites, and other space options like space debris cleaning, which governments are worried about and are looking to do something about, which we just talked about in our present future. So there's all these emerging markets that include things like, for that segment, we're going to talk about space tools, space manufacturing, both of which are huge potential markets and require emerging technologies like 3D printing and new age materials that we cover quite often on our podcast. So I also want to talk about 3 different lengths of time in investing. So when you're talking about space, this is probably a generational type thing that you're going to talk about for investing. So we're going to talk about our short term, which is based on 1 to 5 years. We're going to talk about long term, anywhere from 5 to 25 years, and then we're going to talk about generations, those things that are plus 25 years. In the very short term, obviously, we're looking at there's commercial space startups that offer some practical and commercial value, such as vital space infrastructure, satellite communications, things that are already kind of being created. In the long term, there's companies that have the skill and technology to develop cutting edge spacecraft and technology. Those are things that are not just pure space play stocks, but things that are contributing to the infrastructure. So what companies should you be looking at? First, and probably a safe bet, are your traditional, plane companies, those companies that are making planes and, all these things maybe for the military. You're talking about your Boeings, your Airbus, your Northrop Grumman, those companies, because despite what you hear about SpaceX and Blue Origins and the Virgin Galactics of the world, these are companies that are going to continue to make additional products that generate large amounts of revenue. So you're looking at countries with that use traditional companies to create, maybe we're talking about in the near future, a company like the United States creating their Space Force that Donald Trump has said he wants to create. They're going to go with their traditional partners, people that they have worked with before and who can, build armaments and things into these, these types of, flying machines that possibly go into space. So that's something that I think of in the near future. So if you're looking at something that you're like, well, I want to be cautious about this, and you should be looking at these types of stocks that are going to continue to grow because of their current relationships with other companies and countries and things like that. Next, I think you need to look at companies that are relatively new but established. So now I'm talking about SpaceX, but it's, I wouldn't have invested a couple of years ago. I mean, there's a high risk, obviously, investing and partially, high reward. But he said that, SpaceX, back in its early days was pretty close to bankruptcy. They had some failures and they were on their last, I think, couple $1 million. I mean, same thing he said with Tesla, too. So I guess he just likes to skirt on the edge. But you're looking at companies that are now established. They have regular customers, things that will continue to grow. I think SpaceX has a lot of different potential with space tourism, with delivery of goods and services to I mean, we're talking about NASA's talking about building a moon base in the next couple of decades. So who is going to be delivering those things, and who is, the government has contractors all the time for other things. Why wouldn't they have a contractor for this? I mean, and so looking at those government contractors, you have to think about some companies I think you should look at that. I mean, obviously you've heard of SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic. I think it's purely a tourism play, and I'm not really buying that. But I'm looking at companies like United Launch Alliance, Inmarsat, Intelsat, and Orbital, which are companies that would fall in the line of those government contractors. Finally, I think if you want a really high risk, high reward, you're looking at companies that are inspirational but have a potential high reward that we were talking about. So things you have to really understand. You have to talk to somebody who really knows these technologies. But you're looking at your companies that want to accomplish things like space mining, like planetary resources and astrobotic. So those are companies that, I mean, we've covered space mining on this show before. I mean, it's potentially trillions of dollars of assets if we can capture an asteroid and mine it somehow. So, I mean, that's something that will be, that company will just, the first company to do it, they could monopolize the market and just, kill it. And that's something, that's worth keeping your eye on, and maybe, in 25, 50 years, that's the time to invest. But, those are the companies you really want to watch, because those are the ones that are going to make, I can't even imagine, insurmountable amount of funds. So, I mean, Chris, I want to ask you and bring you in on this. What are some good space companies, and I'm putting space in quotations because there's so many different, obviously we covered a lot of different topics. What do you think are some good ones to possibly invest in and that you've heard of and you're knowledgeable about?
So, I mean, the thing is with me, it's not so much the companies I'm particularly interested in. I'm sort of interested in the ideas around space and space exploration, and then I think you sort of follow where the technology goes. So obviously you've spoken about a lot of them, right? The fact that Boeing, the fact that Lockheed Martin, the fact that Airbus, the fact that these folks are so connected to the the large global supply chains, and actually that's what it takes to build things in space. Because for things to go into space, you're talking rocketry, you're talking materials that can deal with the impact of space winds, solar winds, all these things. And that takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of investment. And so, like you said, the future is probably much like the past, unfortunately. And that's something that, Elon Musk is running into because, it's sort of hard to develop a car company because it takes so much infrastructure, so much capital, so much ideas around, orchestration, manufacturing, supply chain operation in order to get that off the ground. It's difficult. And that's why, he's sort of flown by the seat of his pants and barely allowed Tesla to take off. But it's still being successful, not only in, the eyes and minds of the media, but also, generally in business, right? For the most part. That because he's a quick learner and he's got great engineers and good people around him. So I think what really intrigues me about the future of space, beyond just who's going to be winning, I think, is what are we going to be doing and sort of what is prioritized. So we were talking about dealing with space debris. We're talking about development of satellite and satellite technology. I know some companies are developing their own satellites and putting them into space so they can do their global operations that much better. We've talked about space mining. We've talked about what is going to happen when you do have a moon base or something on Mars. And honestly, just everything. Just we're talking about a completely different way of living. And so when you live in a different area, you're going to have that much bigger of a marketplace. And because of that, space is so different. It's unlike anything that we've done before because it's not Earth. So that means that special products, which I think you're going to be seeing a lot of sort of interesting things happening in material science for space. I think you're going to be seeing a lot of interesting things for when it comes to food, when it comes to clothing and manufacturing that happens. Because we forget there's a whole sort of thing of being a human, right? We have clothing. We have food that we ingest. We have transportation. We have social connectability and whatnot. So now you're going to have to replicate everything on Earth, but do it in space. And so what that means is there's actually a ton of different companies that can explode when we begin to explore, when we begin to, have regular, Joe six-pack and, and I don't know what Mary would be, but, when you have both men and women, civilians, not billionaires, finding their way into space. Now, I will say that I do think this is far off. I do think that space investment to me is, unless you're going to invest in those companies that we were talking about, the old and true ones like the Boeings and the Lockheed Martins of the world, they're the ones where any sort of space movement, you're going to get the quickest, sort of bang for your buck. And there's a lot of, we said that we'd be talking about a moon base in the 50s and 60s on our website. There is specific pictures of like what the future would be. And of course, we're not on a moon base. I'm not on a hoverboard. I'm not going to Mars anytime soon. I don't see that happen for the next 20, 25 years. I'm not even sure people would want to, because it's so far away. And we'd have to sort of figure out the thrusters in order to get us to where we want to be. But that being said, I am a big proponent of obviously looking to the future and looking to see what's available to you. So, to me, I would, if I was a savvy space investor, I would be looking at the technologies that could allow space exploration and space in order to be enabled that much better. So I'm thinking of rocketry, rocket technology. I'm thinking of, things that maybe doesn't even involve us going to space. So like I was saying before, satellite development, intercommunication, cleaning up space debris, just anything along these lines, right? Lower Earth sort of stuff is probably a bigger, impact than anything. I mean, you just saw that the Virgin Galactic finally hit the lower Earth orbit just, a week or so ago. So there'll be more of this, and it'll be easier and cheaper to fly into lower Earth orbit. It'll be easier and cheaper for all of us to sort of touch the sky and touch, the edge of space and get to the edge for sure. And, all the other stuff, the conglomeration of companies that will build things for this group that will be making their way up there and making their way up to our moon bases and colonies. Yeah, that will come. But in the near term, my guess is, if you're really looking to invest in space, as you said, probably go with your tried and true, because that's where you get your biggest bang for your buck in the near term, in the next at least 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and I'm going to finish up by saying I agree with you. I think you put a lot of good points in there. I mean, so in the end, I think we leave our listeners with a cautious tale, as we say that, look at those traditional companies, like you mentioned, for those good long-term investments. Look at the emerging companies with an eye for the mid-range. Think when we start building those bases on the moon and Mars, look at those potential companies that are going to have an impact on those. And then far off, look at that asteroid mining. Look at that those good investments that could be 50 years from now. You telling your son or your grandson that this is the investment you need to be making. Those could be potentially astronomical. Pun intended. So look at those. Look at this long potential aim, but keep your eyes on the ground and then go up from there. All right, Fraser Cain is the publisher of University Today and co-host of Astronomy Cast. He's our guest today. He's a popular YouTube personality with over 800 videos of content, and is a podcast founder, writer, and astrophysics personality. Born on Vancouver Island in Canada, Fraser grew up on Hornby Island and currently lives in the Vancouver area with his wife and 2 kids. Fraser originally studied computer science before leaving college to found and work for several software companies. He founded Universe Today in 1999 as a website and hobby that grew to become his passion. In 2007, Fraser co-hosted Astronomy Cast, a series which talks about astronomy and space, and is still currently co-hosted by Dr. Pamela Gray. Back in 2014, Universe Today reached a milestone of over 36 million readers, and he's reached over 200,000 followers on YouTube of people who engage with him on the wonders of space. And that's Fraser Cain. All right, Fraser, I just want to say how excited we are to have you on our show.
Super
we talk
excited
about your videos. Yeah, we talk about your videos and your podcast quite often on the show, and we're glad to have you on here to talk about the future of space exploration. Obviously, I know this is a topic you talk about all the time, so and we know that it's a big topic. So hang in there with us as we have a number of questions we're wanting to ask you after listening to you for several years, we feel like we've got a good understanding of things that you could just talk about forever. So this might be like a 3-parter or something like that. If you like this well enough that you want to be back on our podcast, that'd be great. So I'm going to start it off with, like I said, I know there's a million different ways we could go in this interview, and you've literally done dozens of videos and all of this, put out tons of content on your website. Therefore, I wanted to start our discussion on something a little closer to Earth. How about that? Let's talk about the moon. Mm-hmm. When do you think we will have a permanent presence on the moon? Obviously, this has been in the news a lot recently. And then maybe go into, what about Mars, and what would be our hurdles to get to both places?
Right. So, like, when are we going to have like some kind of permanent, like, scientific outpost, like what we have with Antarctica on the moon?
Yeah.
I think that's getting closer now. There's NASA, of course, with their plans for the Lunar Gateway, the Deep Space Gateway, but they also have plans to send people to the moon. The Chinese are working literally as quickly as they can to establish a presence on the moon, and the Europeans have put together their own plans for a village that they plan to create on the moon. So you've got 3 countries, if you call Europe a country, but 3 government-based organizations that are looking to do this. And then at the same time, you've got SpaceX. One of the capabilities of their new rocket, the Starship, is going to be to just fly to the moon. It'll just fly to the moon, land, take off again, and return to Earth. That'll just be like a thing that it does. And then you've also got some interesting collaborations between aerospace companies like, I think, Northrop Grumman and Bigelow Aerospace are planning to send a spacecraft that's going to go into lunar orbit. So I think there's a lot of attention on the moon. They won't all work, but I've got to say that one of them is going to stick. And so I would say within 20 years, we will have some kind of permanently manned station on the moon, is my feeling.
Interesting.
Wow. Yeah, you heard it here, folks. That Futurists typically don't do predictions, but 20 years. And I think that's pretty good. I think that's pretty solid.
Yeah, that's my guess. I think what is going to surprise people is how awful the moon is. And how awful Mars is, because I know that's going to be your next question. Mm-hmm. That Earth is the best, and our attempts to leave Earth are going to be met with the resistance of the cold, uncaring universe.
Yeah. Well, Bill Nye just recently said something about that. He said, "Why would we ever want to leave the Earth when it's perfectly suited for us, and we can barely survive here?" So that's an interesting concept. So what do you think about Mars?
So Mars is, the moon is the worst for sure. Yeah. Mars is like second worst. Now, obviously, a lot of people are excited about Mars because, it's got air and, a incredibly thin carbon dioxide atmosphere. It's got gravity, but only 35% of the gravity that we have here on Earth. It's got a day length that's about the same length. That's kind of exciting. It's got punishing radiation that's striking it all the time, but it's got rock that you can dig into. So there's a lot of really interesting reasons to go to Mars. And of course, there's the tantalizing possibility that there is life there or was life there in the past. And there would be no better way to search for that life than to have some kind of permanent science colony that was set up on Mars. But I think, again, it's the same thing, and I've got to agree with Bill Nye on this one. The Earth is the best. The Earth is the best place in the entire universe that we will probably ever reach and encounter in our current form. It has oceans and forests and life, and anywhere else that you go, you, through technology, will be able to not die. That's the best you can hope for. Is we didn't die on Mars today. Tomorrow, who knows what's going to happen? Because take the worst place that you could go on Earth. Take some dry, cold Antarctic desert, and it is a paradise compared to what you're going to experience on Mars. It's Mars is cold to temperatures you can't even comprehend. The The atmospheric pressure is 1% what we have on Earth, which means that you're going to have a pressurized spacesuit anytime you try to leave your habitat. The radiation is not blocked in any way, shape, or form by its magnetosphere or really by its atmosphere. So you're going to experience full doses of cosmic radiation as you walk around on the surface, which means you're going to have to limit your time outside, which means you're going to have to live underground. You're going to have to live in a tunnel. And you could live on a tunnel here on Earth if you wanted to. Like if you want that tunnel life, you could find a place here on the planet that you could live underground and be a mole person. So I think that, but I do know that for a certain group of people, though, just the experience and the adventure and just the challenge is the part that they're so excited about living on Mars. And to them, I wish them good luck, and I hope they stay safe because they've got their work cut out for them. But I think for a lot of people who have this really quick kind of ad hoc, like, oh, it'd be so cool to live on Mars. Like, it really wouldn't. It would be really hard all the time until you died. So that's my response. And who knows, in the future when we can take a trip to and from Mars and it's safe and you can spend a week on the surface of Mars and jump around and have a good time, that'd be awesome. Who wouldn't love to do that? But until we get to that point, it's going to be a hard life for anyone who wants to go there.
Well, and one thing that we've talked about on our show is we brought up you've had several episodes on your YouTube channel about terraforming, and we've discussed the terraforming of Mars and the moon, and I think that's really fascinating. I mean, obviously, that is one of the goals of eventual colonization is to potentially to terraform these. Is that something? Obviously, I mean, give our audience like a perspective of how much effort it would take to do that. And I mean, just to talk about that.
Well, I mean, terraforming is a level. I mean, terraforming is this idea of changing the environment of Mars or Venus to be more Earth-like. And on the one hand, it is feasible in that if you could somehow thicken the atmosphere and you could make Mars a better place to live, you could theoretically thicken the atmosphere to the point that you could walk around without a spacesuit. You could plant plants and theoretically get to a point that you could breathe the atmosphere. Water could return to Mars and things could grow. So those are all possible, but there's other things that we can never deal with, like the lower gravity, the 30% gravity of Mars. We don't know what that does to the human body over the long term. We have no idea if a human embryo will be viable with going through that process on going through that cycle on Mars in that low gravity. We just don't know. And then the radiation, we still have no easy way to prevent that radiation. There are some ideas back to living in caves, but so I think so on the one hand, these things are feasible, but on the other hand, you may not end up with the kind of planet you were hoping for, but also just the level of technology that would be required, the level of solar system engineering that you would need to have at your disposal to be able to do that kind of thing boggles the imagination. It is theoretically possible, but not practically possible we can barely send human beings into low Earth orbit and keep them alive. To do the kind of solar system engineering that would be required to turn some of these planets into places that we could live on is so far beyond where we're at today. It's kind of crazy to even think about it.
Yeah. This actually takes me to maybe, I mean, it's great to talk about the far off future. I think definitely terraforming Mars is a far off, right? This is a futurist podcast. So, pardon Jack's, wanting to terraform Mars as soon as possible. But there may be
hundreds of years.
Yeah, 300 years away. But some things that are closer, are also in the news. And one thing I wanted to bring up was not only, the space exploration, but space mining. This is something we also brought up. And, we just had a video of a robot on a comet, which was amazing to me. There is numerous companies such as Deep Space Industries, Planetary Resources, iSpace, Cleospace, Offworld. We're talking about, doing engineering on these extraplanetary objects for possible space mining, something along those lines. Maybe you could just talk to us a little bit about what you think about the concept of space mining, but also maybe we can dovetail a little bit too, and just our understanding of, these extraplanetary objects that are all around us, and maybe the possibility of a potential extinction event, or us just kind of paying a little closer attention to these things that have caused so much chaos on the Earth, in the future. So I guess both the positive usage of these gigantic, rocks of gas that are going around our solar system, but also possibly the negatives as well.
Well, so as bearish as I am on the prospects of us living and working on the moon and Mars over the long term, I think that we will set up science colonies, research stations on these places, but I don't think we'll go too far beyond that. I am very bullish on space itself, and especially what you're talking about, which is that there is literally, limitless resources out there for the various asteroids in terms of water, which can be used for rocket fuel and breathable atmosphere. There's metals and every kind of mineral you could possibly want to hope for, and the capability of 3D printing, space-based manufacturing is growing in leaps and bounds. And all it's going to take is one company to be able to make more money by extracting resources from space, from an asteroid, whatever, to start this whole new industry. You send up a factory, the factory builds more factories, the factories build more factories, they, and then they can build things out in space. And, I always say that gravity wells are for suckers. Once you've gotten out of a gravity well, don't go back in, right? It's too much work. Stay out in space. And so you can really see this future where every kind of heavy industry that we do currently on Earth, all the stuff that we do that pollutes the planet, that all gets pushed out into space, where robots are extracting metals and various minerals. They're doing their manufacturing out in space, where the waste is irrelevant, doesn't matter. You just the waste isn't going to cause any damage to anybody. And you can send the final results of that production back down to Earth. If you want a new phone, the phones can be manufactured out in space and then can be dropped down onto Earth for a fraction of the environmental impact. And that is really the thing that I think we need to really focus on, is the fact that our planet is good for life. It is the only place in the universe that we know of that has life on it, and is the place that we evolved together to live on. There will never be a place that will be better for us than Earth is. And every time that we ruin it, we are taking away from this amazing gift that the universe has given us. So I think that I can see, and it's going to come fast. There are some amazing developments that are happening right now. Made in Space has a 3D printer on board the International Space Station. They're following that up with a 3D printed robot called the Archinaut that I sort of describe as a spider that spins girders out of its mouth and then attaches them together. So it 3D prints screws and bolts and attachment parts, and then pulls them out of its guts, and then bolts them all together. And so it can build you a space telescope, or it can build you a space station, all the sort of the trusses and stuff out there in space without you needing to launch any of it from Earth. And that changes everything, right? Now that you don't have to worry about building the stuff on Earth gravity and then getting it out into space. And you're exactly right that we may become so sophisticated in extracting the resources that we are able to dismantle potential Earth-crossing asteroids. We will, over given enough time, we will push all of the material into places that makes it easier to access, and at the same time reduces a lot of its risk for us down here on Earth.
Well, and Fraser, I have to ask you. So one thing that we like Chris said, we are futurists, and one thing we think about is future technologies, and I think you're touching on that so much, and especially when you're talking about accessibility. Obviously, one thing we've covered on the show is the idea of a space elevator, something like that, or capturing comets and then being able to mine the resources from that. Do you think that's the next step? I mean, is that even before having a colony or something like that on Mars, is capturing an asteroid, figuring out ways to get that material in and out of the Earth's atmosphere in a more effective and efficient way? Is that the future of near space?
Well, I mean, I would be surprised if you ever even need to bring this stuff back into the Earth's atmosphere. That, there are asteroids that have a what's called a low delta V. So you only need a little bit more thrust to get from going around Earth orbit to catching up with one of these asteroids. A fraction of what you need to go to the moon or to Mars. And then you can extract resources from this asteroid, metals, organic materials, water ice in, some of them actually have a significant amount of water ice in them, and then send that material back to Earth orbit, send it back to manufacturing facilities that are orbiting the planet. Don't send it back to Earth, because then you're just going to have to carry it back out of the gravity well again. So it's going to be this bootstrapping that's going to happen once we've made that first bridge to space. So that's what I see. Is I just see people getting better and better at extracting resources from space and manufacturing in space. Those two industries will go hand in hand, and we have no idea what the future holds for either of those.
Yeah, fantastic. I actually want to get any sort of extraplanetary rock and gas away from our atmosphere. I don't want it to get it closer. So thank God you said that, Fraser, because I'm feeling a little bit better about here in New Jersey or really anywhere on the planet. I don't want anything to hit us anytime soon. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. Maybe we're not switching gears actually, because some of these the telescopes, right? Some of the most important telescopes. I know you've been speaking about some telescopes in some of your videos. I know you've been writing about them too. There's a bunch of new ones that are being, proposed, ones that are, being put into, sort of operations. The James Webb, of course. Just wondering, I think it'd be good to talk to our audience a little bit about how important these new telescopes are going to be when it comes to the future of universe exploration. And,
sure.
And maybe which one do you think, or maybe you could talk a little bit about, because I don't think a lot of people know in depth how different some of these telescopes are, right? And what they do, right? So from the Giant Magellan Telescope in Chile to the radio telescopes, like the ones in South Africa, to of course the James Webb, of course, which will be in space, right? So, maybe just talk a little bit about the differences in some of these telescopes, but also which one do you think may have the biggest impact to how we not only view space, but also maybe how we can figure out whether there are, planets like ourselves we could maybe not have to terraform on, or even just figure out that much more about how space is developed and how we can use that sort of knowledge to better humanity. So maybe just a quick overview of those telescopes, and also which one do you think will have the most impact maybe in the near term, and then maybe one that maybe have impact in the far term.
Yeah, there are an amazing number of pretty exciting telescopes that are just around the corner. You mentioned James Webb. That is the next big generation of space telescope that's coming from NASA. Unfortunately, it just keeps getting pushed back. I think the launch is sometime estimated for 2021. So it's just we keep hearing delays from James Webb, but I hope it's going to be worth it. James Webb will be an incredibly powerful telescope capable of looking pretty much right back to the beginning of the universe. It's going to be able to see the first galaxies coming together. It's going to be able to observe the atmospheres of planets that are orbiting around other stars and help confirm if maybe they have life there. So it's going to be a very important telescope, but it is just one of the really exciting scopes that are coming out. The next big one that I think is going to be pretty exciting is it's called the Large Synoptic Survey Telescope. And this is a telescope that's coming out. It's going to be also based in Chile. That's where all the good telescopes are these days. And this is a very different telescope than a lot of the ones that are out there. The LSST is designed to be fast. So it's going to observe portions of the sky every 15 seconds, take as deep a picture as it can, and then move over a little bit, take another picture, move over a little bit, take another picture. And so it's going to be scanning the entire night sky every 2 days. And what this is going to give astronomers is a view into anything that's happening that is changing. So when you think about the asteroids or Kuiper Belt objects or Planet Nine or supernovae or really any weird variable stars, things that are changing from night to night to night. And so this telescope is going to be able to find these with a level of precision that has never been possible before. And I always say that this will show astronomers what the universe is doing when we weren't looking, because now we'll be looking. And that's in 2021. First light, I think, happens or the first tests start in 2019. So we're just a couple of years from what I think is one of the most exciting instruments out there. You mentioned the Square Kilometre Array, which is this huge radio telescope that's being built in Australia and South Africa. It's going to give us, think about an entire kilometer-sized telescope, and it is going to give us this view into the radio waves, which is a very interesting, for astronomers, portion of the spectrum that shows them where some of the star forming regions are of the universe, and even our sun is screaming in radio waves. So they've got this really sensitive instrument that can be directed at all these different things. And again, it's an enormous telescope. And then they're just going to keep coming fast and furious. You mentioned the Magellan telescope, which is going to be in Chile. There's the 30-meter telescope that's getting built in Hawaii now. That's pushed forward. The monster of them all is going to be the extremely large telescope. That's coming in 2026, also in Chile. It's going to be a 39-meter telescope. So just to give you some perspective, the biggest telescopes that we have here on Earth right now are a little bigger than 10 meters. I think there's an 11-meter telescope in the Canary Islands. So to have a 39-meter telescope is just going to be a stunning thing. And this telescope will be capable of directly imaging terrestrial worlds around other stars. So it's going to be able to, if they can find another Earth, this telescope from the ground will be able to just look at this planet, which is, now it's not going to see more than a couple of pixels, but there'll be very data-rich pixels that it's going to be able to tell us a lot. So put a pin in the extremely large telescope. The other, and then back to space, there's a follow-on telescope already in the works after James Webb, which is going to be sort of pushing even farther than James Webb can to see the first stars that were ever forming. And then the telescope that I'm probably the most excited about is this one called LUVOIR. It's the true successor to the Hubble Space Telescope. It's the large ultraviolet optical infrared telescope. And the plan here is to build a 15 to 20 meter telescope in space. So again, imagine a telescope that is bigger than the biggest, just for comparison, right? James Webb is 6.8 meters and Hubble is 2.6 meters. So the most successful telescope really of all time, Hubble, is only 2.6. So imagine a telescope that's almost 10 times larger than Hubble that will be out there in space, take images. And what LUVOIR will be capable of doing will just blow your minds. And like, for example, there's a one number that I really like to quote is the fact that it will be able to observe the atmospheres of enough worlds around us, like out to several hundred to 1,000 light years around us, that it will be able to tell us with about a 90% accuracy whether or not we're alone in the Milky Way, whether there is no life or life on any other world in the Milky Way. Wow. And we'll get a census of how much of that there is out there. So I think you're going to see, as long as people stay tuned, they're going to see, and I've skipped a bunch, but there's a ton of really interesting telescopes that are coming online, really interesting experiments and instruments that are all going to be available over the next couple of years. So it's a new golden age of astronomy, really.
Amazing. I've never been more excited about metal and glass coming together.
Yeah.
Just completely amazing. So, we're always timely, right? As timely as possible. And there was an interesting thing that came out, and of course these theories always come out, right? And it had to do, did you see this idea about dark fluid, the unification of possibly dark energy and dark matter into one sort of, substrate? I know I'm butchering that. So, we'll definitely leave the gentleman who's working on this paper, in the show notes for sure. But I wonder if maybe you could just talk to our listeners just a little bit about, okay, what is dark energy? What is dark matter? why is it so important to understand about what these things are, and why is that important for our understanding of space so we could better explore it that much better?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how much it will really help with our exploration of these things, but it's, we are curious and we want to understand the universe around us. And both of these things that you mentioned, dark matter and dark energy, are weird mysteries that astronomers just don't have a really satisfying answer to yet. They're two separate things. Dark matter is this, this is an experiment that's gone back for decades now. And so when astronomers measured the rotation speeds of the stars moving in a galaxy, they found, like, if you look at the speeds, if you measure the speeds of the planets in the solar system, the Mercury moves the fastest, and as you move out in the solar system, Pluto moves the slowest, right? And that is because the sun is the center of the gravity in the solar system, and in order for the planets to maintain their position, they have to move at this speed. And so you would imagine in the Milky Way or in other galaxies out there the exact same thing to happen. But what astronomers found was actually each star is moving at the same speed. So the stars close to the center of the galaxy are going at the same velocity as the stars that are in the outskirts of the galaxy. And the only way that would be possible is if actually the mass was not concentrated at the center of the galaxy that they were all orbiting around, but in fact the mass is surrounding the galaxy. And this is where this idea of dark matter came from. And since then, dark matter has been confirmed in all kinds of ways. They use this technique called gravitational lensing, where they observe the light from a distant galaxy as it moves through space, and they can see the light being distorted as it moves near galaxy clusters that are surrounded by large amounts of this dark matter. So they can map out with quite incredible precision, even use it as a telescope to be able to observe objects that would be farther away than they would normally be able to see. But the problem is it doesn't seem to interact in any way, shape, or form with regular matter. It doesn't give off any illumination. It doesn't seem to be colliding with it. It doesn't seem to be blocking it. It's just there, and it's the vast majority of what is there, and yet astronomers can't see it. And so they're trying to figure out what it is, and they're narrowing down what it can't be. Various things, maybe its gravity works in a way that we don't understand at the larger scales. These are the kinds of things that they're looking to remove these ideas and hopefully get some confirmation to what it actually is. But it's still a fairly big mystery. Dark energy is more recent. It was discovered in the late 1990s, 1998, I believe. And astronomers were tracking essentially the distance to these exploding supernovae called type 1a supernovae. They give this quite accurate measurement to distance in the universe. And astronomers were trying to figure out how essentially the expansion of the universe was slowing down, because you would expect with all the material that was holding it together with its gravity, as the universe continued to expand, it would coast to a stop and maybe even collapse back in on itself, this idea of the big crunch. And what they found was not only is the expansion continuing and will continue forever, it's actually accelerating, as if there was some invisible force that was pushing apart every part of the universe and making it go faster and faster and faster. And literally, that is all they know. They know that the universe is expanding, the expansion of the universe is accelerating, and they don't know why. They've checked and double checked and have found confirmation that these things exist, but they don't understand what is causing them. And that's what science is about. Here we are in 2018. We can look back and look at things like plate tectonics, DNA, and lightning, and all of these things that scientists have figured out. They used to be mysteries. Scientists went out and gathered data and made hypotheses and did experiments and tried to figure out what it was. And we are now at the end result of all of these things. But other scientific mysteries, we are smack dab in the middle of them, and we are watching, for some people with frustration, as they try to understand what's going on. And so here we are. It could very well be that dark matter will be figured out within the next couple of decades, and it might be centuries before dark energy is figured out. So, welcome to mysteries.
But and Fraser, I have to ask you. You keep talking about the expansion, the ever expanding universe, and it continues to grow, and it just makes us feel smaller and smaller and smaller. And the fact that, well, I mean, we should feel that way because we are very infinitesimal when it comes to the size of the universe. But knowing that, then in your opinion, even would you say that it is possible? We're getting ready to understand these mysteries of the universe slowly over time. Is it possible then to think of a future where we can travel maybe beyond our solar system? Is FTL space travel possible? I mean, we've talked about the Alcubierre drive on this show. We've talked about new technologies that are being developed. We've talked about ion drives. Tell us, in your opinion, if you think that we will reach that point where we can explore this ever expanding space. I mean, tell us what you think about all that.
So, I mean, this is the sad part, right? Is as you learn more about the size of the universe, you realize just how far away all of these places are, and even the Voyager spacecraft, which is right now the fastest spacecraft that's leaving the solar system, will still take about 50,000 years to get to the nearest star. So it is timescales that we are just not equipped to. We want to be able to hop on an airplane and show up at our destination 5 hours later. So that is the problem that we're kind of dealing with. There are some ideas, but there are maybe ideas that we could accelerate very tiny spacecraft distances that would be interstellar within a human lifetime. You could use, like, say, there's this idea of the breakthrough star shot where you could shoot a laser at a tiny little solar sail and it would be capable of crossing the distance between us and Alpha Centauri, and it would only take, say, 40 years to get to Alpha Centauri, and traveling at 10% the speed of light. So we are still a long, long way from being able to have any reasonable methods. And those are just, that's traveling below the speed of light. We have no knowledge of anything that would let us move faster than the speed of light. There are ideas. I'm sure your listeners are have heard things like the Alcubierre drive and wormholes and things like that. But right now, a lot of those rely on physics that are either people are fairly sure aren't possible or have yet to be discovered. So I'm sorry to say, but so just again, get back to it. Get used to loving Earth because we're going to be here.
That's okay. I love Earth.
Warp 5 speeds.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're going to, we are definitely going to do a great job of expanding into our solar system. And I think we will start to send some probes to other star systems, but we are a long, long way from being able to send human beings to other star systems. And really, when you look at what's happening with computers and robotics and artificial intelligence, will we really be us 200 years from now? I mean, we're going to be robots, right?
Interesting. Yeah. So then that's a good segue into my next question, because as we continue to expand, and I would hope that we do, we get out of the solar system eventually, 1,000 years down the road plus. The idea of discovering intelligent life or just life in general. Do you believe that we will make that discovery in our own solar system or outside of that? Or do you believe that we are the only intelligent species out there?
Well, I mean, this is this idea of the Fermi paradox, which I'm hoping you guys have talked about in the past.
Oh, yeah. We have.
Yeah. So I think the Fermi paradox is one of the most unsettling ideas that I ever think about. And whenever anybody gives you this really glib answer to the Fermi paradox, well, I guess it's just too far. Maybe they don't want to talk to us or whatever. I think they haven't thought about the Fermi paradox enough, because when you really think about the Fermi paradox, you think about how, although it is difficult, it's not impossible to send our robotic spacecraft to other star systems and send those manufacturing facilities that I mentioned to other star systems to produce countless versions of themselves to go to other star systems and build monoliths on various worlds. It seems really surprising that we have no evidence whatsoever that there's any life out there in the universe. My instinct, my gut tells me that we are either the only or one of the few intelligent civilizations that has ever showed up in the Milky Way and maybe even the entire universe, which sucks because then the pressure is on us to not wipe ourselves out.
No pressure.
We don't seem to be very good at this. So, but at the same time, the rovers are on Mars right now, looking for evidence of life. The telescopes that I mentioned are scanning the skies and are going to start looking for life on other worlds. We are really, science is going to really put in its best effort to find out whether or not we're alone in the universe. And we may very well find that everywhere we look, we don't find anything. And if we do find life, then the questions get really complicated, which is like, well, why is there not intelligent life then? Why are we, again, why do we only seem to be the only life that has gotten to this point? So I think that there's a lot of really creepy, unnerving concepts that go along with this. The least scary one of them all is we're alone.
Our first guest was a gentleman by the name of John Smart, and he's a futurist friend of ours. And we not only talked about the Fermi paradox, but we brought up his idea. It's called the transcension hypothesis. Have you heard of this?
I've heard versions of it. Yeah.
Essentially, where computation is getting better and better, right? It's the whole Ray Kurzweil stuff. And, we're going to have this, billions of computing capabilities in a nano. And when you get so much information in an infinitely smaller and smaller area, then, all physics breaks down, and that's a black hole. And essentially that's how we can, that's where the aliens are, right? Or aliens are robots, right? Like you said, that are going to be traveling everywhere.
Yeah. And, for me, though, I mean, like, you would expect computers, if you did have some kind of computer-based civilization, they would be looking to turn as much of the universe into more computer. And so you would
Borg.
Yeah. Right. So then the question is, why have we not been turned into computer, right? Why do we have trees and oceans and mountains and Lego and all that kind of stuff, and not just more computronium as far as the eye can see. So whenever anyone comes up with it, and this is sort of back to that idea, I was mentioning that, it's a sort of, people have these glib responses to the Fermi paradox, but you have to say to yourself, well, like, for always, everywhere, all the time, right? Like why is there some part of the universe that isn't, why did they get to us yet? If that's the case. And astronomers have done really detailed surveys. They've looked out into the universe. They've scanned many star systems and even entire galaxies looking for the signature of Dyson spheres and things like that, and no luck. So it does feel really weird that we've got this planet that seems to be unimpeded by any external force from any other civilization. It's a weird thing to me. And we're about to send our spacecraft out into the universe. We're about to do it, right? So why didn't anyone beat us to the punch? So weird.
Well, maybe, I always think about this, but, we always think of life as people like ourselves, right? When we watch Star Trek and those sorts of things. I'm interested in the alien life that is really, mushrooms and plants and animals and stuff like that. When you think about it, the computational power, the ability for plants to communicate, do all sorts of stuff. I mean, obviously we're pulling away from futures here, and we're talking about some crazy, fascinating things. But it's been so great, and such a rich conversation too. I really, really enjoyed it, Fraser. One last question from me: why space? Right? So we have to do so much here on Earth. We have to worry. This is a podcast where we explore many things. We explore the economy. We explore social pressures. We explore the environment. We explore policy and legal aspects, politics, just about everything. And I think some people think, well, why are we putting Mars rovers on, or why are we putting a rover on Mars? Why are we trying to build this stuff in the moon? Why are we even doing this anyway? So maybe just give us your pitch. Why space? Why is it important to make these investments? Why is it important to understand what's outside of our atmosphere? Why do this work that you've spent your life doing?
Well, I think the first answer, of course, is that we have curiosity. I mean, it's scientific. Like, why do any science? Why science? ? Right? Why study the human genome? Why study the movements of the planet? Why study materials? And why study the atmosphere and anything? Right? Why we we are curious and we want to understand the universe around us. And when you think about how much of the universe is here on Earth and how much of the universe is not Earth, it's a big place to study. So that is the starting point. It's just like why do we do anything, right? Why is there any kind of science at all? Because we have questions, and so we go in search of answers. And I think that on its own is a perfectly reasonable reason to understand space, because it exists and we are curious and we want to know about it. But then, of course, the other part, and I sort of mentioned this earlier on, is that space, I really think, gives us the place to where we can extract resources without really hampering and harming our environment. And we are demonstrating, as we pollute the air and the water and as we wipe out life forms here on our own planet, that we are not good stewards of this world, and that's because we poop where we live. And so why not spend some of this time? We are, as I mentioned, we are right at the cusp. We are really just like right around the corner from being at the point where we can extract resources from space, things that were going to ruin our day anyway, as you said, and turn them into resources that we can use. And we can beam the energy back to Earth. We can drop balls of titanium back through the atmosphere for use in our manufacturing if we want, or even more finalized products. So I think that we're going to discover that it makes the most sense to really push any activity out into space that isn't having a great planet, that has a climate that we like and the diversity of life that we enjoy, and is the perfect place in the universe for life. So I think those two reasons are the, we're curious, and it could very well be that it is the way that we can continue living our extravagant lifestyle without having to pay the terrible cost.
Well, okay. Well, that pretty much sums up all the time that we have for today. Fraser, I think this has been an awesome conversation. We knew it would be before you came on, and now we're definitely sure that it was. But before we end our discussion today, I just wanted to give you time to talk about any of the work that you'd like to mention. I know that you recently had a book that came out.
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Sure. So, well, I mean, you guys mentioned the videos, of course. That's the YouTube series that I do called The Guide to Space. I think there's the 450-ish main videos, plus all of the other stuff that we've done, all the question shows and live shows that we do. Universe Today, which is my website, Astronomy Cast, which is the podcast that I do with Dr. Pamela Gay. And as you mentioned, we just published a book called the Universe Today Ultimate Guide to Viewing the Cosmos. And it's really it's a tool for learning to get into amateur astronomy. So I report about space, and I'm also an amateur astronomer. And this was written by our amateur astronomy beat writer, Dave Dickinson. And I covered I was able to organize all of the astrophotography in the book, and got in about 75 of my favorite astrophotographers to provide images. And it's really just the one book to help you go from, man, I really love space and I wish I was an astronomer, to knowing what telescope to get, how to take pictures of the night sky, when objects are going to be visible, how to see meteor showers, how to even take photographs of the space station and things like that. So it was our objective to really give people this one book to rule them all. And
Awesome.
And that's just came out about a month and a half ago, and people have been really enjoying it. So I'm really excited about it. So definitely check that out. The Universe Today Ultimate Guide to Viewing the Cosmos.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on our show, Fraser. I think we both are looking to when you're coming back next. If
All right.
you can. And
no problem.
and
Happy to do it, guys.
And yeah, thanks again.
All right, thanks for having me.